How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tear Talk. Guys, great discussion today. No guilt. From Ted Bundy to Bryan Kohberger in today's cases, the people that are committing these crimes don't feel a sense of guilt. And with that said, what else don't they feel? Because guilt is a foundational emotion that is a gateway for other emotions, including remorse, which allows for empathy. And sadly enough, killers like Bundy, killers like Kohberger, maybe even killers like Jake Haro, they don't feel remorse because they don't feel guilt. And today we're going to explore that. And the reason why this topic came to mind is I was revisiting Robert Hare's book on psychopaths. This is like my third time going through it. And he brought up a quick blurb about Bundy and a quote from Bundy about guilt that opened up in today's dialogue. I'm actually going to be leaning on that quote, and that's what we're going to be exploring today, because Bundy's quote on guilt, it's pretty profound, and I wanted to explore a little bit more of this, and I have my guest today, Joe. What up, Joe?
What's happening, Anthony?
Joe, do you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yes, sir. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant from the Texas Department of Corrections, 29 years, 6 months. And I'm currently working as an assistant jail administrator in our local sheriff's department in the jail division, and a panel member here for Tear Talk.
Yes, and it's good having you on again, Joe. So, Joe, I thought this would be a good dialogue because as I was rereading the book, Robert Hare's book on psychopaths, it's Without a Conscience, it's called. There was an interesting quote that he got from Bundy. And by the way, guys, I'm reading a lot of books just to help me move some good content onto this channel. So now I'm reading a book, I think it's from John Douglas, about mine hunters. And then I'm going to go into another book about most evil, which a lot of these stuff I've read before. I'm going to try to go back and revisit because I think I've grown in the process. There's a lot of things I may not have caught on to the first time that I'm going to catch on now. But if you guys get a chance, if you haven't read it, Without a Conscience is a great book. Again, I think it's my third time reading this book. So this is a quote that came from Bundy, and I thought this was interesting. It said, guilt. It's this mechanism we use to control people. It's an illusion. It's a kind of social control that keeps people in line. I don't feel guilt. So Bundy outright dismissed guilt, showing how some killers detach completely from conscience. And it raises questions. Do modern offenders truly lack guilt, or do they only feel its substitute, which I put shame, fear, or regret? And I'll explain that because So, Joe, as I've been doing these shows, and I've been really trying to get into the mindset of these individuals, Kohberger made me want to look back at some of the older material I read, and then also Kohberger had a fascination with Bundy. So it's unique now that as I was reading Without a Conscience, that Bundy's being brought in. But I said, you know what's funny? Guilt. In order to have true remorse, you need to feel guilt. I mean, you can feel remorse without guilt, but it's not true remorse. Like I could feel guilty for, let's say I'm playing chess with Joe and I keep beating Joe. I could feel maybe somewhat remorse because I keep on beating Joe and Joe's getting frustrated, but I don't feel guilty about my actions because we're playing chess and my job is to beat Joe. I'm not going to let Joe win. But true remorse is a connection of first feeling guilt, which is foundational, and then eventually feeling remorse because now it's empathetic. And the cool thing about this is it has to come from the inside out, which means I have to feel the guilt first, and then it starts to manifest in some level of empathy towards others and who I have affected by it, or who was affected by the wrong action. Now, granted, some people think shame, regret, not so much fear, but let's focus more on shame and regret are part of that picture connected to guilt. And that's not always the case. I was looking at, we did a show a couple of days ago about Laketon Snelling. That's the cheerleader that killed her baby. And when we believe may have killed her baby. We don't know yet. We're trying to find out if the baby was a stillborn or not. That hasn't been released yet. But there is reason to believe that she could have killed her baby. So with that said, I didn't want to put out the wrong information here. She could have, we don't know yet. But there is a picture of her going to court. I think I have it here. Let me just show you. So, guys, just so you know, this is Kohberger. We all know who that is. This is Laketon Snelling. Now, her head is down, and everybody was like, wow, do you think that she could feel regret or shame? And by the way, guys, this is the book Without a Conscience. That's Robert Hare. Let me move the thing so you can see his title. All right, so the funny thing about this, if you look at this picture here, let me remove this and put this back on. Her head is down, but shame or regret does not always relate to guilt, because I could just regret committing something, and now these are the consequences of that action. It has nothing to do with how I've affected others. Or I could be have shame that has nothing to do with guilt. That's more about vanity. I don't like how I'm seen now. Like Kohberger, I love when they had the victim statement and they were attacking his ego, attacking his pride, and maybe at some point he may feel some level of regret, but not about what he's what he's done has affected others, but rather maybe regret and how sloppy he carried it out, or maybe ashamed that he wasn't as perfect as he thought he could be. So I want people to know that shame and regret does not always connect to guilt. Sometimes shame, regret could all be selfish in nature. So my first question to you, Joe, and feel free to go wherever you want with this. I give you a lot here. But, how does Bundy dismissal of guilt help us understand the mindset of today's offenders? Because I think in his mind, guilt is control. And these type of individuals don't want to be controlled, especially by emotion.
Yeah, I mean, you figure some of these guys are probably so far detached from emotion that they don't feel anything to begin with. They obviously don't feel any empathy or sympathy. So why would they feel any form of guilt or remorse? Like you said, if they do, to me, it's going to be on the selfish side, because they regret the fact that their perfect plan wasn't so perfect, and the remorse is that they got caught, not that they committed the act. So going back to Bundy, I think a lot of it's with him going forward, most of these people are without emotion to me. The heinous acts that they carried out. Look at the guy that killed that girl on the subway. From I forget, Russia or wherever stabbed her so many times and then left her sitting there crying until she bled out. I mean, it's crazy, the actions that people can take and not feel any kind of emotion other than rage and anger while they're doing it, but nothing afterwards. With the lady there that was standing at the, in the courthouse, I forgot her name just that quick. Her pose could be her trying to look stoic in front of everybody, to maybe not portray herself as a infant killer, or I just, for me, that could be taken several ways. It could be remorse, it could be shame, it could be guilt, or she could be just trying to, act somewhat stoic and composed and not see, anybody in the courtroom, her losing her composure.
Yeah, by the way, you were talking about Anya Zarutska. That was the Ukrainian girl that was killed in North Carolina, Charlotte. That's just a horrible thing to watch. And this woman here is Laketon Snelling. And it's funny because when we I did 2 shows on Laketon Snelling. One I did with Denise Schoenwald, mental health counselor, and then I redid it again with Joe Pingaro. But we had a little bit more information when I redid it with Joseph Pingaro. And believe it or not, the context of Laketon Snelling is someone who is just, it's just vanity. It really is. She's in my mind, she's a very surface individual, because she was able to put the baby in the back of a closet and go out and then come back. Yeah. So she probably, I 100% believe that she was going to dispose of the baby. I mean, there was really no remorse. At first, I thought maybe in the very first video when we were trying to find out who did the call for the wellness check, we may have gave her some credit for that, when it turned out, no when the facts later came out, it wasn't her. It was probably a roommate or someone trying to still figure that out, but maybe someone that smelled something, or maybe someone she called in confidence and they said something. But it was very, it's very surface. And that kind of touches into what our discussion here is, because technically, as I said, guilt is foundational. Remorse is an outward level of empathy. So it's not surface, it's deep. It comes from the inside out. So guilt is first recognizing of wrongdoing, right? I did something wrong. It's internal and it's tied to your conscience. It's internal. That matters. And again, it's funny how Bundy saw guilt. Bundy saw guilt as pressured, as it's placed on you, as opposed to honestly coming from within. Now, he could have just have no empathy, or maybe in his life, he learned to compartmentalize feelings for others so he can keep control. Because I think that happens a lot. I think that there are people that don't want that to be under some level of control of others, so they don't allow themselves to feel empathy, because it's too much of a controlling emotion that disables them. And then remorse is guilt plus empathy. I hurt someone and I feel sorrow for them. It's internal plus outward concern for the victim. Now, for shame and regret, sort of, I have it for self-focused distress. I am bad because people see me as bad. Or I did something and now I have to deal with these consequences. It's still I, me. There's nothing about the victim, and it's external. It's tied to image, exposure, or consequences. So there's some caveats here, Joe. True remorse requires guilt. Without guilt, empathy cannot take root. So like for this guy here, there is no guilt. So the only thing you may get from him is shame or regret, but still nothing related to a victim, nothing related to any level of empathy. Just he doesn't know how to process those feelings. So shame, as I mentioned in this case here, shame may not require guilt at all. A person can feel ashamed simply because others see them as bad without ever admitting to themselves that what they did was wrong. And it also falls into judgment as well of how they're being judged, especially for someone like here who was very big on social media. So she's very concerned with how she's seen.
Yeah.
She's very concerned with that. So shame would be a natural reaction for her. And then I have other feelings can branch from guilt to some level, but the real feeling that we're looking for here is remorse, an honest understanding of first that what you did was wrong, and then going into how what you did affected others. Does this ring true to you, Joe, at any level?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about Kohberger, I mean, just by looking at him, you can tell, he's not processing anything. Guilt, remorse, shame of any magnitude. He just has that blank stare. You can tell that it's, and he's already carried himself in the fashion that it's all about him. The way he's being housed, the ways, the liberties he's getting or not getting, it's all about him. It's not about the victims. It's not about him feeling bad about what he did, or the fact that he can't process and understand and can't believe that he did what he did. It's all about him. When you turn to her, she's got the look of shame because of the fact that, now everybody's got her portrayed as a monster, and she's not the TikTok babe anymore. She's a soon to be inmate. So, when you see these people in all walks of life, and some people are trained to turn their emotions off. And that as well as I do, especially, in the business that we're in, when we have incidents in the jail or the prisons, because, any emotions that we share, the people below us kind of take those emotions on. So if we show a chaotic emotion or a sorrow emotion, then, that's going to affect everybody else. And it's kind of the same with these people. They compartmentalize and they're able to pack these feelings away so well that, it on the surface, it really doesn't bother them. until they get caught. And even with Kohberger, you can tell even with him being caught, it still doesn't bother him. He doesn't have any ounce of guilt, any ounce of remorse of any kind. It's all about him. Her, on the other hand, looking at her, you can tell she's starting to process things. You can tell she's got that shameful look on her face because everybody, is looking at her like she's a monster. She's not that person on TikTok anymore. Now she's in the court of law, and looking at, being charged with the death of an infant. So, people process things different ways. I've seen some later on down the road that, years later that wind up showing remorse and guilt. I seen it every day in the prison. I had an old convict that worked as a janitor for me. He had been locked away since the 40s. And, he was pressing 80 years old. And, it wasn't until maybe 3 years prior to his passing that he felt any kind of remorse for, and he was in there for murder because he shot his friend with a shotgun, over some sort of land dispute. I forgot it was over a land dispute, but I can't remember the specifics. And he took him fishing. He sat down by a tree and he blew his head off. And for all these years, he just did his time like a normal inmate. And, it wasn't until, I guess he must have felt himself circling the drain health-wise before he showed any kind of remorse about, taking that man's life. And, like I said, some people are well at hiding those feelings. Some people are just so emotionless they don't show the feelings or can't even project the feelings. And then you have some that, try to get ahead of the game and show the feelings like her and, trying to go ahead and try to get the sympathy because she's ashamed of what she did. And she knows she knows she did what she did.
Yeah. And guys, I want you to know something. Kohberger, when we say they don't feel guilt, they still know what they did was wrong. It's not that they're insane at any level where they can't tell the difference between right or wrong, because, again, you can tell that by whether something's planned, whether they try to cover their tracks. I mean, obviously, there's a lot that went into play even with Kohberger where, covering himself up and, checking the house out a few times. So, I mean, they know what they've done is wrong. So this has nothing to do with not knowing if what they've done is right or wrong, because they know that. But the problem is that they don't feel what they've done is wrong. And the funny thing is, you can kind of see this difference even with offenders when you're trying to look to help them. There are people that do foolish things, and I'm going to say something crazy to you, but not all foolish and what could be seen on the surface as a heinous act could be done by really, really bad people. I want people to understand that. Sometimes there's the pressure that can force somebody to do something that they will later fully regret. And when I say regret is they'll feel guilty for it, they'll feel the remorse, and they'll feel the regret of the action because of what they've done to others, not because of their status or because of the consequences, but rather true regret, true shame, true remorse. Now, that's where you see it. True guilt leads to true remorse, which could lead to some level of true shame and true regret, because now it's coming from the inside out, but it's going towards what they've done to others. And the regret and shame is now built on what they did to others, what they did to their victims, how it's empathetic. Now, with that said, I have knowing versus feeling. So offenders often know their actions were wrong. They understand laws and rules. So we know that with Kohberger, right? We know that he understood the laws and rules. He was a criminology major. Offenders, but they don't feel guilt. The emotional weight is missing. This gap creates danger because you got knowledge without conscience. Remember, that's important. Knowledge without conscience. Shame sometimes fills that space. So offenders act sorry in front of others, but really feel nothing privately. So now knowledge without guilt makes offenders dangerous because they can use awareness of right and wrong to fake guilt or remorse strategically. Because if they know what they've done is wrong, and they may have some understanding of how what they've done could affect others, so they become very performative, but they don't feel anything. But they can become very performative. And trust me, guys, you can easily see this. We saw that with Rebecca Haro and Jake Haro when they were trying to pretend to cry, and oh, my child was missing and all this other shit, and turned out not to be true. But at the end of the day, there was no emotion in these. They were trying to be performative. And again, they felt they knew what they did, but there was no remorse, there was no empathy. They were just performing a role because they knew that would be expected of missing that would be expected of a parent who had a missing child. So they understood the role. They knew that if we do this route, people are going to expect us to be doing A, B, C, D. But we knew that that was totally rehearsed. That was performative. There was no emotion there, no true emotion. So again, I said shame could step in without guilt. It's audience based, not conscious based. So again, it can step in. But there are times where if you do have true guilt and you do have true remorse, then the shame and the regret could be true because it's built on empathy. And then you have other offshoots. Instead of guilt, they may show fear of being caught or regret over their situation. Neither equals conscience. Okay, so why is this so dangerous when someone knows right from wrong but doesn't actually feel guilty? And I'd love to get your opinion on that, Joe.
Well, to feel guilt, number one, you have to have some sort of emotion. Um, you know, I've seen people who had guilt as soon as the act was committed. I think I told you about this story once. It's been a long time ago. I had a sergeant who worked for me when I was a lieutenant, who got into a domestic dispute with his wife, who was also she was a subcontracted employee with the medical. She was a head psychologist, and part of her job duties was to conduct group sessions with parolees outside. And apparently she was having an affair with one of them, and he found out. They got into an argument, and he wound up stabbing her 17 times. He's currently incarcerated in Texas, doing a 45-year sentence for murder. And, oddly enough, I was the first phone call he made after the incident had happened. And of course, when me and law enforcement got over there, he was still in his uniform, and he was spread eagle on his car, and he was telling me, "Hey, my handcuff keys in this pocket. My chemical agents are right here in this pocket, this, that, and the other." And he was just so matter of fact that it was eerie. Once he was taken to the county jail in Brazoria County, that's when everything started to hit him like a time bomb. He realized what he'd done. He realized that his wife was dead. For, I'd say probably the first 3 weeks, he wouldn't say a word to anybody. He would just go and face the back of his cell. They physically had to go into his cell to do cell checks on him to make sure that, he was breathing, because he stayed covered up a lot of times. It was instant regret on his part. But it was oddly enough that, after he committed the act, he was still able to retire from the agency and draw a pension, because he was capable. He was time capable of it. And his check went to his 3 kids every month. One of which is his wife's child from a former marriage. So, when you think about it, he just killed this child's mother, but yet is still trying to take care of the child while he serves his sentence. So, the mindset of somebody who commits any kind of heinous act can be all over the gamut, from guilt to to instant regret. Shit, I just, what have I done? I just did this. It's weird how the dynamics of a person's mindset can kind of dictate how they're portrayed in the media, in the courtroom, and to a jury.
Yeah, and by the way, for someone like your friend, and we'll probably talk a little bit about this with Jake and Rebecca as well, but I'm sure it happens more often than not. When you have people that, may have the potential to feel remorse, usually they build a shield of blame and justifications as to why they've done what they've done. They're not so callous with it, but they've learned to come up with a system that could be blaming, and then eventually they become justifications. And then eventually, if you're trying to reach to them, you have to not allow them to blame. You have to not allow them to find their justification and blame. You need them to deliver ownership. You need them to deliver ownership, and ownership cannot be given if you're still able to have conditional ownership. Like, yeah, I still did it, but if the baby wasn't crying, or I still raped that woman, but if she wasn't wearing clothing like that she was wearing, that was so provocative. I mean, that's not true ownership. It's still conditional. You killed the baby because you killed the baby.
Yeah.
You raped the woman because you raped the woman. You cannot minimize what you've done. And it takes a while, because sometimes people will 100% lean on that justification, because it's not really a justification, but in their mind it is, because one, they don't want to take ownership of it. So they're used to doing the blame shifting. And then, eventually you have to try to work with them until they no longer minimize it and they take full on accountability, which brings us now to kind of what you brought up, Joe, which was a little bit about guilt versus blame shifting. So remember, Jake, so this is Jake Haro, has a history of abuse. He is an experienced child abuser. One with Promise Faith back in 2018. And then again, we're assuming now with Emmanuel, his son. And then you got Rebecca, who I think may be the weaker of the two, but you don't know. You really don't know. But me and Joe did a show, Joe Pingaro, and we said that if I was to try to flip someone, if you look at the narrative and the context, you would assume, but we could be wrong, but you just assume that Rebecca would be part of it, but she wouldn't be the main person. And people want the person that's responsible for doing the crime. So yes, she's a partner to it, but who's the one that killed the kid? That's what we want to know. And that's the truth people are going to want to discern. And it's funny because I think Rebecca holds on to the story because there's still some influence that Jake can have on her, or maybe she holds on to the story of the Ola story because in her mind, if that story is not real, then she has to face the consequences of what happened that she did nothing about. But with that said, it's a lot of blame shift. And I'll guarantee you, Jake Haro has an issue with anger. He is impulsive with his anger. And I'll guarantee you, if the baby is crying, he can't control the baby, he is going to hurt that baby. And the only reason why I'm thinking that is because that's what he did with, most likely with Promise Faith. I mean, look at her, 3% of her brain working. She can't see, she can't walk, broken ribs. She can't talk. I mean, he ruined her for life. And I believe now, that was when she was 10 weeks. I think now she's 7. And then Emmanuel was supposedly 7 months when he got missing. Now, granted, this guy should definitely went through a lot more time, because I think this guy is a threat. I think that, and I did a video on this too, guys, check out the videos that we're doing. They said he presents himself as low risk. He's not low risk. The funny thing about how these tests are done and all this other stuff, when they go back for the risk assessment, low risk is really just liability. It's someone that can't make the promise to you that the person is no risk, because ultimately they can't control the outcome. So they say that the person's low risk. But the funny thing is situations can change. And a person like that who loses control of a situation will go back to what they feel gets them that level of control. And in his mind, it's going to be violence on a very, very vulnerable victim. So what I have here, Joe, is I have shame may not partner with guilt. We talked about that. Do you see guilt in the Haro case or mostly blame shifting and shame-based self-preservation?
I see self-preservation for sure, especially on his part. I'm not so sure about her. As far as how she's played into this, but on his part, he's definitely in self-preservation mode. For her, I don't think the true real picture has set in for her yet, and I don't, like we had talked about this before. I don't know how far, as far as his history, if she knew anything about, his history prior to her meeting him. But I definitely see for him, it's self-preservation. It's all about him.
Yeah, and again, as this case unfolds, we'll probably know a little bit more of how much her involvement is. But my belief is the argument here is probably going to be mostly on Jake, and let's see what we could do with Rebecca, because I think Jake is the one, only because he has a pattern. Would I be shocked if it's Rebecca in comparison to it not being Jake? Yes, but does she have it in her? I guess we'll see. I don't have enough of a history on her to know what she's about. We only have what Jake is about. Now, for Bryan Kohberger, I want to go back to him again. So let's just get a picture of him again. So the defense strategy portrays him as misunderstood, intellectual, and rational. Professors' peers noted odd behavior, but no guilt or empathy. Bundy's notion echoes in Kohberger a lot. Guilt is rationalized away, replaced with cold analysis. So I think Kohberger was able to compartmentalize empathy. Remember, he used to be a heavy-set kid, so maybe he was picked on him, and we really got to know a little bit more about his background. But there could be a chance that he was picked on for being overweight, and then he eventually became a person who just didn't have empathy, who just doesn't care about others because he felt that, hey, who cares about me? And it's funny because at that young age, when you're going through puberty and all other heightened emotions, picking on someone at that young age could cultivate them into being something that really is a psychopath, someone that just does not have empathy for others. Or again, that's the nature versus nurture issue. Or you have someone that could just be born with that level of the brain that just doesn't work. It doesn't have that human connection. So, is it something that we cultivate? Is it something that they're born, or is it just a mixture of both, where maybe he has a lower threshold? Because there are some people that do get picked on and they wind up feeling empathy for other victims because they don't want them to be like them, and they wind up becoming really good, heartfelt people who try to do the right thing. And there are other people that just cut that off. I don't want to be weak again. I'm not going to allow for any type of emotion to come in because nothing's going to control me, and I'm going to control that narrative. And then I said for him, shame may show up in how he manages his public image, not in concern for victims. That's why it was great during the victim statement, like for the Gonsalves family, more importantly, where they were attacking his pride and ego. So now this is unique for Kohberger. Intelligence can replace conscience. So intellectualization becomes a shield. I think for him, he wanted to study criminology, I think, and really go the sexual level, because I think he was trying to figure out who the hell he was or who the hell he wanted to be, and maybe get closer to understanding Bundy and following those acts or other serial killers he admired. So I think his intellectual curiosity could, and that's not giving an excuse, but could have led him to go further than someone else like us would, because we actually have good, strong values that would not allow us to want to hurt others, where he may not have that level of compassion. So he may keep moving and moving, because at the end of the day, this is about him and nobody else. I got shame for someone like Kohberger often looks like I don't want to look foolish rather than I harm someone. And then other offshoots like rationalization is another guilt mask, reframing actions to avoid responsibility. So Joe, does Kohberger strike you as someone who feels guilt, or someone who intellectualizes everything to avoid it?
Well, I mean, you can look at his picture and tell that he's intellectual. He's intellectual, but at the same time, he's cold, he's calculated, he's diabolical. you know, what's the old verbiage is you can be intellectuals as you want to be, but if you have no common sense, you're really no better than the other person. And I think that's what separates him from a lot of us. You know, we may not be intellectual, but we have the common sense to know that, you know, this is stupid. I'm not going to do this. This can ruin me for my career. This can ruin their families. You know, we have that extra emergency brake that he apparently doesn't have. And when you look at him, you can tell he's a very intellectual individual. But he also, you know, has that he portrays that emotionless, cold, calculated, I really don't care attitude. And, you know, that's what's so interesting about him.
And you know what's funny about that too? Because obviously I love what you said, like, so maybe so intellectual, but lack common sense and simple things. Like, you know, even when he committed the crime and, you know, he wasn't as perfect as he thought he was, even though he thought he could be. And sometimes you could be so intellectual that you see yourself as being superior. Yep. That's why the Gonsalves family was great, how they were able to lower that, because they knew that's how he saw himself. He saw himself as superior, which makes everybody else an object. Yep. So I think that when they knocked on him, they knocked him down pretty quick to say, yeah, you may have read some books and maybe be an intellectual and on reading books and knowing all this stuff, but man, you had no idea how to apply that knowledge. And that, to me, really, you could read books all you want, but if you don't know how to apply the knowledge that you're learning, then, you know, to me, you're not as smart as you may think you are. And again, this is someone, just to let you know, for him, I think that when it comes to feeling guilt, someone who intellectualizes everything to avoid it, this is a person here that if he was given the death penalty, it would have been a gift, because this is someone that can never contribute to society. It's just, you cannot rehabilitate him. This person right here cannot be rehabilitated. You got to understand that there's nothing in that person that would change for the better. If anything that he would do that would even look that way would be performative in nature. I have a little bit about Robin Westman. That was the shooter out of Minneapolis at the Annunciation Church. There's a lot of things going on with guys. I have to be politically correct. So there's a lot of things going on with Robin. And guys, don't take it the wrong way, guys. I'm in a political position, so I have to be politically correct. So please don't hate the channel because I have to do this. But with that said, you got a manifesto. You got life changes, a bunch of stuff. And I mean, the person committed a very evil act. But if we were looking at it, and I think that's what people are trying to study now, was it situationally driven? Was this person just purely evil? And it's tough because when you look at these circumstances, sometimes you have to separate the act from the person. And we see that all the time. I want you to know that. You see that in investigations. You see that with profiling, because at the end of the day, the motive of what they've done could relate to the pressures that they're facing. And sometimes those pressures are subjective, how they interpret those pressures. So it may not be something for us to understand from our perspective. So we got to safely go into their head and say, okay, why would you do this? Why would you do this? And it's what we call tactical empathy. It's to try to see, is there something? And again, it's not to minimize what they've done, but rather to get an understanding, to get ahead of it if it happens again. If I asked you if Westman didn't commit this act, could he have been saved from doing it? And if so, would he have been that bad of a person? Or is he only considered that bad of a person, or she only considered that bad of a person because they finally went through the act? That's why it's good for us to understand these things, because it lets us know if we can get ahead of it. And that to me is the key. So for Westman, I got violence and responsibility, even though I got to go back. I did a long dialogue. I think it was with Russ, or maybe you. I forget, when we broke down the manifesto. Was that with you, Joe? You're muted, Joe. Was that with you when we broke down the manifesto, or was that with Russ?
No, that was with Russ.
So there are extremely hints of narcissism in her, whatever, manifesto. So I actually have reason to believe that her case may be a bit more complicated, because I felt that she was bragging about certain things that would have an effect on her family and loved ones. If you go back and check out that video, it's a long one. It's about 3 hours, because we broke down a lot in that video. But with that said, she also notes key concerns about when she came out and not being accepted, and then having trouble when she transitioned, and maybe this wasn't the life she wanted. And so there's a lot of complexity with this one. And I'm sure on top of that could have been maybe how she felt she was being viewed by others, maybe her own insecurities. She could have projected onto others by, oh, they're not asking me a question, they're automatically judging me. They're judging me, when sometimes people could be just curious. So I have sudden violence raises questions, because when I was talking to Joe, active shooter, stuff like that, when you have a sudden act of violence, people want to know what caused this violence. One is for their own sense of peace and closure to some extent, because if you don't give people a proper reasoning, then they live in fear. They live in paranoia, because if we don't understand how this could happen, then this can happen at any time. So people do want a sense of closure. And guys, it's never going to be so absolute. It's never going to be mental health on one side and gun rights on the other. It's not. It's messy. It's in the middle, and it's messy. There's no answers that fall in absolutes of politics. That's why we never really solve much. It's in the middle. It's where it's messy. It's where we all have to be working together to try to figure it out and hit things from all angles. So again, was this anger-driven impulse or complete absence of guilt? Now, again, that's a very good question to ask when you see, let's say, an active shooter or something that has immediate act of violence. I mean, is this person acting on pure emotion, pressured by situation, pressured by emotion, or is this person truly someone that, wants to kill people for the sake of killing people and just doesn't feel anything towards what they're doing? It's not driven by the situation. They're just, this is what I want to kill count. I want to just try and kill as many people as I can. So the aftermath behavior often shows justification. I had to do it. And then shame may surface in facing arrest, family disappointment, or media. But that's about saving face, not victim empathy. In Westman's case, she took her life, which is usually common in these types of cases. Common for many reasons. Common because they don't want to face the consequences. They want their own level of control in how the story ends. Maybe they're afraid to kind of go that route, so they just take, as I said, total control. Or maybe there is a level of embarrassment and they're not ready to face that embarrassment. But Joe, I got a question here. So real quick, justification is shame shield. We talked about that. Offenders frame themselves as the real victim to preserve image, and we talked about that, right? Like I killed my kids, they wouldn't stop crying, and I don't know, guys, I couldn't deal with it. I broke down and blah blah blah. Well, you're not the victim here. Or I shot up a school because I don't know, I was having trouble transitioning, and I don't know, my head wasn't there, and all this other stuff, and you're not the victim. And other offshoots, anger, defensiveness often replaces guilt. Offenders lash out instead of reflecting inward. Now, Joe, when someone commits sudden violence, do they usually feel guilt, or does justification and shame take over in the moment?
I don't think they really feel it in the moment. I think that, you take most of these people act on impulse. They act on emotion. Sometimes it's anger. Sometimes for females it's postpartum. There's a whole plethora of emotions that suddenly make people spontaneously commit these acts. And then sometimes you have that period of time where, the person has thought about it and they build up to it, like the school shootings. I mean, chances are it was a kid being bullied at some point or being tormented because of their sexuality or whatever the case is. And, they decide one day that they're going to go to school and commit an act, and, for a criminal, and sometimes it even happens even after they're incarcerated, after they're found guilty. The best thing for them is to present a defense, to offset their offense. And I don't think there's many people who feel instant regret in the moment that they commit an act, unless they know that they're going to jail or that they're going to prison. Otherwise, I don't think that these are any kind of emotions that come up until after they've gone through the court proceedings, and get incarcerated, or whatever the case is. And I've seen people who've taken their own life, and it wasn't about shame, it wasn't about guilt. It was kind of their last fuck you to law enforcement. You're never going to know what happened.
Yeah.
So the gamut of the mindset of a person can range from one end of the spectrum to the other.
Yeah, and guys, I agree with Joe 100%. I don't know if there's ever an active shooter alive long enough to even see if eventually they do have guilt that could surface later on, when their beliefs or their justifications no longer become strong enough, and you have a strong person that's able to break them through it and have them face ultimately what they've done with a new perspective. But again, that's the thing. Pressured situations, whether, again, when I say pressured situations, a lot of it could be emotionally driven. And then when the emotion's gone, you may not allow yourself to feel anything. But eventually, with the right person, they could break that. And I've seen it. I've seen stone hard, killers turn around and regret everything they've ever done. But it's a crack that they're very protective of. But then once that crack opens, it's almost every choice they've ever made has been filtered through some antisocial behavior. And mind you, that's another thing too. People that are antisocial doesn't mean that they lack empathy. They're just antisocial. So granted, when they start learning that there's other ways to do things and better choices, then, when they're introduced to that thought, there's going to be a level of ownership with their prior choices that's going to come into the mix. And now they make a strong decision. The strong decision is, I want to take on this right path, but I have to face what I've done in the past. I got to close this off, because if I don't close this off, I'm going to live with these in my shadows. And it's good to see the counselors, because they're trained experts and they know how to try to blend both. Like, you can't honestly move forward without addressing what you've done in the past. But I have seen a lot of people that have been antisocial. I'll give you an example. I have done tours in my, when I worked at the female facility, where late night tours, where I'm, checking on the cells. And I have seen women who have killed their babies cry when watching movies. And they don't know we're watching them, but they'll cry. They may cry at a mother who lost her child. And it's like, wow, I think someone like that could cry. But again, when you find out a little more about what they've done, again, not justifying or minimizing, just giving you guys perspective here, because I don't agree with what they've done, but to understand what they've done, there could have been certain pressures or certain matters where they felt hopeless or something, and they felt that this act was justified. And even if they knew it was wrong, it was a less wrong in their selfish ways. But then eventually they work with a good counselor, gets them to admit that they did a very selfish choice. It opens up something in them, and it changes how they view things, because again, in their mind, they protected themselves through justifications and really weak excuses, blame shifting, whatever it is, and someone's able to turn them around, and now all of a sudden they see the world differently. And again, it's tough, because this person had committed something that was so heinous that the act itself is unforgivable. But can you forgive the person who did that act? I may not be able to forgive. That's a question to ask you guys, because that's a question I really want your perspective on. If the person is making an honest go around, and they really made, they committed to a bad, I'm not going to say they made a mistake. I'm not going to say they made a bad choice. They committed a bad act, but somehow or another, they're able to turn around. There is honest sincerity in their change. It's genuine. They start to feel guilt. Can the person be forgiven and not the act? Can we separate the two? Because, Joe, in my time, I have seen people who have committed some crazy acts that you would think are cold and heartless, but then in the context of work with them every day, you could see connections that they have with their family that they're not faking, or with other areas of their life. I see gang members who will kill somebody in a heartbeat for turf, but will cry when their son is saying goodbye to them and they got to go back to their cell and the son's going home. I mean, for a Kohberger, he would have none of that. He would have no feelings, no empathy. There is no turning that person around. But maybe that son now for that gang member becomes something that we could target, because there is empathy in that gang member. The son just exposed it. And that's what our counselors do. Would you, Joe, am I far off here?
No, I mean, some do. Some will show emotion at the oddest times, whether it's movies or maybe getting a visit from their loved one, or, just something random. The other end of the spectrum, I've seen him, death row inmates who just didn't give a shit. They went out the same way they came in. I distinctively remember an inmate by the name of Ponchai Wilkerson, committed a capital murder, was tried, given a death sentence. And this dude every day gave the staff blues, assaultive, chunk feces on him, just whatever. And the day of his death sentence, I mean, they fought this dude from his cell to the death house. And then the holding cell from the death house fought him all the way to the gurney. Got him to the gurney, strapped him down. They start rolling they let him say his last piece, which was, F you to everybody, and F this to the warden, and F you to the family of the girl that he killed. And told the warden, go ahead and roll the drugs. Let's get this going. And with his last breath, rolled his head to the left and spit out a handcuff key. His last fuck you to the bosses and the law enforcement community. So when you're dealing with these types of people, the spectrum for these folks are all over the place. You got one person that committed such a heinous act, and, you put them in the day room, they're watching TV and a movie comes on, and, a sad scene comes in, and you visibly see this person crying. They're crying for this person in the movie, but they're not crying for the victims of the families that they victimized. And then, you have some that come in that just don't give a shit from the time they step in to the time they step out. And, unfortunately, it's just the way the world is now.
Yeah. And guys, it's not that many. For me in my career, I may have bumped into a handful of individuals who just really had no level of empathy. Definitely more so when I was at the higher level of maximum security for a few years, about a little less than 2 years. I dealt with a lot more. So like Joe said, maybe death row may have a few more. But you can still find a few in general population, but most of the ones you're surrounded with are antisocial personalities, not individuals that are sociopathic or psychopathic. But with that said, I did work in a sex offenders unit as well. And then there you're going to find a lot of sociopathic behavior, in my opinion, because in order to do that type of crime, you really just can't have any empathy. I have 2 more sections here, Joe, but one more section really, and then the close off. I want to push in the courtroom a little bit, because this is where you start to see emotions being on display. And this, I think, will be good for those who are watching, live hearings and whatnot. So again, court is where shame most often masquerades as guilt. So you get the tears, the apologies, the deep regret. But you have to ask yourself, what are they really regretting here? What they've done to the person, or just what they've done and how it affects them? You got, again, true remorse requires guilt plus empathy. True remorse requires guilt plus empathy. And correction staff, we see guilt used strategically all the time. We see it for parole, lighter sentences, program approval. They play it out again, but you can kind of tell it's very strategic in nature. And then, so remember, guys, shame is audience based. It may not be tied to guilt at all. Guilt is internalized. It exists even when no one is watching. That's key. And other offshoots, depression, self-loathing sometimes appears in custody, but even that is self-centered despair, not victim-centered remorse. And the question I had here, Joe, was how do you tell the difference between genuine guilt and a courtroom performance? I know for corrections as custody, because we oversee them daily, we see them more than anybody else would. Real guilt is always lived out. You see it. Even when they think nobody's watching, you still see it. Where fake guilt or shame-based guilt is situational and strategic. You may see it in the courtroom, but then they go back to their cell and they're perfectly dry-eyed and no concerns. But then there's those that go through it in court, and then when they're in their cell, they're the same energy's there. They're depressed. They're kind of going through the motions, and they really feel a level of guilt. I remember a story where this person wanted to get in touch with the mother of the person he killed. It was a gang rivalry, and because he had nightmares about what he's done, he couldn't help but see the person he killed. And it turned out the mother actually forgave him a long time ago, but he felt sincere guilt for what he did. And he did what he did to change his life around. And the mother, at least when I watched this, the mother of the child that he killed, or the not the child technically, the other gangbanger, the mother still at the time kept in contact with the person that killed her child. So that says a lot about the mother. But basically, I think the mother also understood that they both weren't innocent either. They both were foolish kids who did foolish shit because they made foolish choices. I remember another guy who shot and killed somebody, and he said he this was an honest answer. He didn't regret shooting the kid, the other guy, because, again, he was a gang member. It was either me or him, but he did have regret over having a life in which that became a choice. And I just thought that was an extreme honest answer. So he wasn't guilty. He didn't feel guilty for what he did because he had to survive. He just felt regret because he led a life where that became a choice. And I thought that was a very honest answer, an answer that I'm still kind of conflicted with, because there may be times where you've done something wrong, you've done something wrong, but it could have been out of survival. So you may not feel guilty that you did what you had to do because you had to do it, but you may regret certain things that led to the point where that had to be done. In his case here was becoming a gang member and then living that life. So I thought that's another unique approach, because again, you can't push, because now if I have a person like that and they're faking guilt, it's not sincere.
Yeah.
I may not say, hey, I need you to feel guilty to feel change. No, that may not always be the case, because I can't feel guilty for, protecting myself. But I should never been in a gang to begin with. Okay. Well, there's a different perspective, a mind shift. What's your thoughts on that, Joe? Do you think, how do you tell the difference between genuine guilt and a courtroom performance, or just, I guess,
well, I mean, like Kohberger, take Kohberger for example. He's sitting in the courtroom, almost looks catatonic to the point where he's not looking at you, he's looking through you. So you can tell that there's no empathy, sympathy, regret, remorse on his part whatsoever. When it comes to the the gang shootings, a lot of them rationalized it as the him or me defense. Even though they were both wrong to begin with, they were both probably convicted felons that should have never been in possession of a firearm to begin with, let alone been in a gang. So they still rationalize it as it was either him or me. So they feel a little bit of guilt, to the fact that, the dude's dead, or not, because he may be opposing gang member. But at the same, the same fact that, he was in self-preservation mode in his mind, and he felt that he was in the right because it was either him or me. Regardless of the whole total scenario that they should have never been, involved in the gang business to begin with. But, sometimes the courtroom acts are somewhat genuine, because of the fact that they realize now, when they look in the courtroom and they see all the family members of the person that, they have killed, that there was an actual person and they were loved by somebody. So, realization sets in when it's more real when you see 20 people or 30 people in the courtroom for that family member that was killed versus one-on-one, just being you. I may not have any feelings towards you when I pull the trigger and shoot you, but a year down the road, when we go to trial and I see your wife and your kids and your parents and all your family members sitting in there, and I'm thinking, and you start thinking, that this was an actual person. At that point, you would expect to see some sort of remorse from the individual. When you make them realize that they were an actual person, they were somebody that was loved. And, then again, you get some people that come in there that don't give a shit either way. And, and most of them, when they do, they portray that hardened criminal, in the courtroom until sentence is imposed. And, then it's a little bit different story. The only regret they have is they got caught and they're getting a 70-year sentence. So, I don't think there's a perfect defendant in the courtroom. I think a lot of it is probably lawyer staged ahead of time, prep time, letting them know that, hey, dress, you got a gangbanger who's all of a sudden wearing a 3-piece suit in the courtroom. You got a TikTok mom who's, got her cleavage hanging out. Now she's in business attire, formal attire, to try to put that persona in the courtroom to try to bluff the jury. I don't think it's got anything to do with emotional responses from the internal. I think it's pretty much an act until, it's go time. Some of the court proceedings, I just hate watching, like the Kohberger one. It's just painful to watch because this dude just doesn't give a shit. He doesn't. And you're thinking in your mind, why are we going through this process? Just lock his ass up, throw away the key, be done with it. And then you get some people, I'm trying to think of her name. I think it was Darla Routier. Anyway, the one that drowned her kids in the bathtub. She was going through a lot of postpartum, which came up because she had multiple kids and they were back to back to back. So I don't think her body ever got a chance to really regulate hormonally. And I think a lot of that had to do with her drowning her kids. But when you see these people in the courtroom, the way they act when certain events are brought to light, certain aspects of the crime are brought to light. Some of them have that realization moment, and some just don't.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Andrea Yates.
That's it, Yates.
Yeah, she wound up getting the insane plea, didn't she?
Yeah.
Joe, you made a good point. I want to mention something. I think like with gangs, I want to go back to gangs because that is a different element there to some extent because it's a lifestyle. So when it comes to their survival, you may not get guilt, like I mentioned. You may get some level of regret of the bad choice that led to that. But there are some times where they may feel guilt if the killing was done for their reputation or their ego or their pride. Like, I didn't have to kill the guy, but you want to steal from me, I'm going to take you out. And I've seen that play out. I've seen some people feel guilty because they did a kill that didn't have to be that. Only reason why I killed them is because who are you to try to steal from me? So I got to set this message. And I've seen regret over that. I've seen ego and pride later become regret. But again, it's hard to get or feelings of guilt. Let's just say feelings of guilt. I meant to say guilt. But let's just say if it's for your own survival, and the justification is true. I mean, this was really your own survival. I mean, it was either him or you, and it's not like some reputation survival or ego survival or some perspective that if I didn't do this, my own gang would get me. This was literally in the moment. You're battling with somebody. Because let's say me and Joe, I don't know Joe, Joe doesn't know me, and we start battling, and I could kill Joe, and then Joe all of a sudden kills me to protect himself. I don't expect Joe to feel guilty for killing me. I may expect Joe to regret being in the bar that night we got into a fight, or maybe regret, saying the things that we said to get into an argument. But once it gets into survival mode, I mean, and counselors got to realize that, because if you have someone that's going to regret that, but you really know that it was, life or death situation, the regret, or I keep on saying the regret, the guilt may not be real because it doesn't make sense. I could be wrong. Again, guys, we have these discussions. We evolved to discuss. It would be hard for me to get somebody to feel guilty if they truly, and I'm not saying that's an excuse, because sometimes people can make anything into a defense, but honest, they had to defend themselves. And, like if someone broke into my house and I killed the person, I'm not going to feel guilty for doing it. I had to survive. So I just think that's a unique angle. I think gangs are a bit different, because if somebody was to come up and sell me a bridge that they felt guilty because they think that's the narrative we want them to have, and when you find out that they're feeling guilty because they truly were in a survival mode battle with somebody else, that there was no way out, that they had to fight for their survival, I'm like, you felt guilty for that? Come on, you're selling a bridge. You're selling me a bridge.
Yeah.
Last part I have here is just pretty much the summary. Why guilt matters. So guilt matters. So Bundy dismissed guilt as fake, but society depends on it as an internal regulator. Imagine if you could live your life without guilt. I mean, so without guilt, remorse can't exist, leaving only shame or self-centered reactions. For the ones we talked about, Haro, Kohberger, Westman, Lakin Snelling. Each case, guilt seems absent. Shame and other shallow offshoots like regret or rationalization dominate. Now, remember, you could have true regret or true shame that built off remorse, but it's got to be built from guilt, true guilt. If not, it's just a lesser form and very about you. It's about you. It's not about them. Shame may keep people in line socially, and fear of consequences may deter some, but only guilt plus remorse provide true accountability. Without them, violence and manipulation continue. So the final distinction is remorse is always partnered with guilt, true remorse. Shame may not be. So you can have shame, but you also have shame that's true. So, Joe, final question here is, do you believe guilt is a weakness that holds us back, or the one thing that keeps us human?
I think it's the one thing that keeps us human. We all make choices every day. Some we feel guilty about, some we don't. In our business, when we have to terminate an employee, we feel guilty about it because we know that's an employee who was trying to provide for their family. And even though, they messed up, they broke the rule and we had to terminate them, we still feel guilty about it. I think guilt matters because it shows that you're still humanly attached to your emotions, that you're not a monster, that, you have some sort of empathy or sympathy towards your fellow man or woman. On the other hand, I think showing guilt in a court of law can be a manipulation tactic as well. I think sometimes they will show guilt and attempt to show remorse in order to manipulate their sentence length, to try to make it look good for the jury. But I think genuinely that guilt matters because, it shows the world that we're human, that we're vulnerable to making mistakes, and that we feel bad about the mistakes that we made. Um, I personally think it matters.
Yeah, and guys, this is not the label of guilt, but rather the feeling of guilt. So, remember, like for Bundy, guilty would be no different than a judge saying you're guilty, and I don't feel much. Yeah, it sucks that I'm guilty, but it's not coming from within. It's coming because someone placed it on you. Where we're trying to tell people that if you want true remorse, true shame, whatever it is, that it comes from the actual feeling of guilt. So again, guilt equals conscious. It's internal, tied to morality. Remorse equals guilt plus empathy, which again, sorrow for victim. Shame is performance in some cases. Fear of judgment tied to image may exist without guilt. And other offshoots of guilt could be fear, regret, anger, depression, or rationalization. Most killers do display shame or regret in court, but few killers actually show guilt. Even fewer demonstrate true remorse. So I think in short, guys, I wanted to mention here is that true guilt could lead to true remorse, or should lead to true remorse. And then a true remorse, if it's victim based or just empathetic, then you could see some higher level of true shame and true regret. But if you don't have true guilt, you definitely can't have remorse. Remorse is out of the picture. And the shame that that the person's showing, or the regret they're showing, is really superficial in nature. It's either going to relate to something vanity or some consequence that they don't want to deal with. I thought it was a good dialogue. Joe, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, when it comes to senseless crimes, to be in a court of law, and have to sit on a jury and decipher whether this person's genuine or not. I mean, you damn near have to be a psychologist. Some people are openly remorseful. Some people, you got to kind of dig it out of them. And some of them just don't display any kind of remorse or guilt for what they've done. And it's hard to distinguish sometimes because, the courtroom is like a big theater, and, the plays are scripted most of the time. So you really don't know what's genuine, what's not, other than what the evidence that's presented, in front of you. Some people will, in time, start showing bits and pieces of guilt or remorse. I've had many convicts in my lifetime, in my career with TDC, that 20 years later, Lou, I should have just stayed my ass home like my mom told me to that night. I don't know what the hell I was thinking. And then you have some that have that mindset, hey, it was either him or me, and I'm still alive, and that's what counts. Even though I'm in prison, I'm still alive. So every scenario is a crapshoot as far as whether or not their emotions are real. It's just something that just got to kind of dig at and at some point get to the heart of it and the truth.
Yeah, and remember, guys, we have this dialogue because this goes to show you that sometimes you project feelings that you may have on the people who just don't know how to process or feel it that way. And sometimes we're like, man, how could they do what they've done? Well, what you're really asking is technically, if it was you, how could you do it? And you couldn't, but you don't know them. And the funny thing is, there's many reasons why people do what they do. And some are scary because there's no turning back for that individual, or some are situational where, you have to understand so many different things to truly understand if this person is redeemable or not. And it's funny, in corrections, we have to try to treat everybody as if they could change to some extent, just to be fair. So I would say in some cases, counselors will probably spend time with everyone at a certain time or another, but they'll only be invested with the people that they believe can change. They know you can't put too much hope in those that are going to be hopeless. And if I do and expect something, then I'm not going to have the energy for doing it for the people that could change. That's why in some cases, even people on death row, they may not get programming and stuff because, if I can't get success with them, that could taint my want to get success with others. So we have to keep our workers, our people there motivated. You like a Kohberger, it can't be changed. That's someone that cannot be changed. Ted Bundy wouldn't be changed. John Wayne Gacy couldn't be changed. They're just not those types of individuals. They don't see the world the way we see it. And that could be for many reasons why. But I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Please subscribe. Guys, share it out. Let's get those counts. I haven't gotten subscribers in the last couple of days, so any help would be greatly appreciated. I'm trying to get into that next level, try to get those 100,000 subscribers. So word of mouth, man. And I'm going to look up some new cases, see what I can work on this week with the guys, Joe Pompano, Joe Pangaro, Russ Hamilton, Gary York. Maybe I'll bring in Denise Schoenwald. Maybe I'll go back and get Bobby from the FBI as well, just trying to build my own little resources here, but and trying to do content that you're not finding anywhere else. As always, guys, stay safe.